You ever hear someone say, America is a democracy? Save our democracy. Yeah, cool. Sounds nice. It feels good. It's real, warm and fuzzy like. However, it's not true. And then misunderstanding that one little phrase. And most people don't even know better. However, that's how people justify stripping away your rights, one vote at a time. Welcome back, everybody, to the Trigger Happy Tactical Podcast. And as usual, it's time to lock, load, and listen. All right, today we're diving into something that sounds real boring on the surface. It's civics and it's government structure and founding documents. But this is one of the most important conversations we can have, especially if you care about gun rights, freedom, and not living under mob rule. Because if you don't understand what kind of country this is, you won't understand how your rights are protected or how they get taken away. And spoiler alert, your rights are not protected by a majority vote. They are protected from a majority vote. Now, I'm going to give you a second and let that one sink in. But let's break this down real simple. Like, what is a democracy versus a republic? First, we'll talk about the democracy. A pure democracy means this: the majority rules. 51% of people can decide anything, and laws are based purely on a popular vote. And that sounds fair, right? Yeah, until you realize that 51% can vote to take rights away from the other 49%. Let's make that real for a second. If 51% of people decide you shouldn't own a firearm, you shouldn't say certain things, and you shouldn't defend yourself, well, in a pure democracy, that's it. It's game over. All the boxes have been checked. There's no appeals and there's no protection. But that's unconstitutional, because in that system, there is nothing above the vote. That's not freedom. That's mob rule with some paperwork. Now, here's what we actually are. We are a constitutional republic, and that means that we elect representatives. There are laws above the government, and this is our Constitution. Individual rights are protected from the majority's rule. And this is the part most people don't even understand. The Constitution is not there to empower the majority. It's there to restrain everyone, including the majority. See, this is key because in a republic, there are things you can't vote on. You don't get to vote away free speech or due process or the right to defend yourself. And yes, of course, you don't get to vote away your right to keep and bear arms. So why did the Founding Fathers reject democracy? Well, the Founding Fathers weren't stupid. They had already seen what happens when mobs rule things. See, they studied ancient Athens, which was a direct democracy, and the fall of the Roman Republic, and tyranny disguised as the will of the people. And they came to one conclusion: pure democracy is dangerous as hell. Our Founding Fathers go on to say, a quote from James Madison, "Democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention. They have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths." John Adams says, "Democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and then murders itself." Alexander Hamilton says, "We are now forming a republic government. Real liberty is never found in despotism or in the extremes of democracy." Ben Franklin, when he was asked what kind of government we have, he says, "A republic, if you can keep it." Now, that wasn't just a clever line. That was a warning that this system requires people to understand it or it collapses. Now, the Constitution is the real boss in all of this. And here's where things start to get real serious. The Constitution is not a suggestion. It is not a guideline. It is the supreme law of the land. And more importantly, it tells the government what it cannot do. Not what it can do, what it can't do. Now let's talk about the negative rights concept here. This is something people have rarely ever heard explained. The Bill of Rights is a list of negative rights, meaning this: it doesn't give you rights. It recognizes rights you already have, called birthrights. And it tells the government to stay the hell out of them. The Bill of Rights equals a hands-off list. See, the First Amendment is don't touch our speech. The second is don't disarm our people. The fourth is don't kick in doors without cause. The fifth is don't railroad people without due process. This isn't permission, this is restriction. So then the Second Amendment, why it even exists? Let's get into that because, well, it makes sense in this podcast. The Second Amendment is not about hunting, and it's not really about sport shooting. It's about power, I guess we would say. A quote from George Mason is, "To disarm the people is the best and most effectual way to enslave them." And James Madison goes on to say, "The advantage of being armed forms a barrier against the enterprises of ambition." Trench states, "Their swords and every other terrible implement of the soldier are the birthright of an American." Thomas Jefferson, "No free man shall ever be debarred the use of arms." So what the founding fathers just went to, and let's not forget that, these people weren't theorists. They were guys who had just fought a war against a tyrannical government. They dealt with forced disarmament attempts. They've seen standing armies used against its civilians. The British tried to seize colonial weapons at Lexington and Concord. Does that sound familiar? So when they wrote the Second Amendment, this wasn't hypothetical. It was a fresh experience to them. So self-defense is where these rights start to become real. All right, let's take this a bit out of the history books for a second and bring this actually into your living room, because everything we just talked about, the Constitution and the Second Amendment and the founders, none of this matters if you don't understand what this looks like in real life. Self-defense is personal. When we talk about firearms, people love to jump straight into politics and laws and headlines, but they skip the most important part. Self-defense is personal. This is about you, your family, your home, that moment when something goes wrong and no one is coming to save you. Because let's be brutally honest for a second. The police are not your personal security detail. They are minutes away, sometimes longer, and they're showing up after something has already happened. So what's the legal reality? Well, you're responsible. Here's the reality most people don't want you to say out loud. You're responsible for your own safety. Not the government, not your neighbor, and not policy. And the courts have reinforced this time and time again. There is no guaranteed duty for the police to protect you individually in the moment. That means when it goes bad, it's on you. So why does firearms, or how do firearms level the playing field? Now let's talk about why firearms matter specifically in stuff like this. Because this isn't about being tactical or looking cool. It's about equalizing force. See, without a firearm, size matters, strength matters, and numbers matter. However, with a firearm, the playing field significantly changes. This is where a smaller person can defend against a larger attacker. One person can defend against multiple attackers. And a homeowner can defend their family against someone forcing entry into their home. This isn't theory. This is reality. So what were our founders' intents on the self-defense angle? This ties directly back to our founders. They didn't just believe in resisting tyranny. They believed in the natural right of self-defense. William Blackstone was quoted to say, "Self-defense is the primary law of nature." That idea carried directly into American law and philosophy. The right to defend your life is pre-government. It exists whether a law recognizes it or not. And the Second Amendment, that protects your ability to exercise that right effectively. So what about gun control versus self-defense in reality? Now, here's where all of this collides with some modern arguments. When people start to push for gun bans and magazine limits and waiting periods and carry restrictions, they often frame it as safety or common sense. But what they're actually doing is limiting your ability to defend yourself in the moment it matters most. Because see, what most people don't realize is criminals don't follow gun laws. They don't respect any restrictions, and they don't wait for a background check to clear. But you know who does? You. You do. So let's call it what it is. Disarming good people doesn't stop bad people. All it does is create more victims. Now, let's connect back to the republic versus democracy sort of thing. And this is where everything kind of ties together. See, if we were a pure democracy, People can vote away your ability to defend yourself because all it takes is a little fear, some emotion, and a majority. But in a constitutional republic, that right is supposed to be protected even when it's unpopular. That's the whole point of it. So at the end of the day, owning a firearm for self-defense isn't about politics or identity or looking tough. It's about responsibility, preparedness, and survival. And understanding that safety is your job and nobody else's. And this isn't just someday, or it's not maybe, it's all day, every day. See, rights are not voted on. And here's where people get this shit really twisted. You'll hear things like, well, most people want stricter gun laws. The majority supports this. That's cool, but it doesn't fucking matter. Rights are not subject to popularity contests. Let's take this even further. If rights were based on a majority opinion, the First Amendment would disappear anytime speech becomes offensive or hurts my feelings. The Fourth Amendment would vanish every time crime spikes a little, and the Second Amendment would be gone after every single headline. That's exactly why they're protected from the majority. Now, let's take a quick pause from the serious shit really quick. If you're getting value out of this episode, share it. Like, seriously, this is the kind of conversation that people need to hear, but most never do. Send it to that friend who says things like, we're a democracy, or that coworker arguing about gun laws with you, or anyone who thinks rights come from voting. Because this is the foundation. All right, now let's get back into this and talk about modern day consequences. Let's bring this into today's realm. When people say things like, we need to vote on gun bans, what they're actually saying is we should be able to override the constitutional rights with emotion and numbers. And here's the dangerous part. They don't often realize that that's what they're saying because they've been taught this: democracy equals good. Constitution equals flexible. When in reality, that's completely backwards. So what's the Supreme Court's role in all of this sort of stuff? Well, let's hit a quick reality check. The Supreme Court's job is not to make laws. It's not to reflect public opinion, and it's not to fix problems. See, their job is very simple. They ask themselves, is this constitutional or not? So then how do laws actually die? And this should sound quite familiar if you listened to our last podcast episode, because bad gun laws don't disappear because people vote them out. They die when they get challenged. They move through the lower courts. They get appealed. And eventually the Supreme Court says, that violates the Constitution. Let's just throw a couple real quick cases at you. The District of Columbia v. Heller in 2008. The Second Amendment protects an individual's right to possess firearms, they said. Another one is NYS RPA versus Bruin in 2022. They quoted, gun laws must follow history, text, and tradition, and not opinions. So then, really, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably care about things like firearms and self-defense and freedom. Then you need to understand this. Your rights are protected by the structure of this country. See, what we're seeing right now is a death by 1,000 cuts. Our rights usually don't get stripped away all at once. They get regulated, restricted, compromised, and slowly chipped away until one day you wake up and realize you don't have any of them anymore. And this all started with, well, the majority wants it. Death by 1,000 cuts. So the next time someone says, we're a democracy, you can hit them with, no, we're not. We're a constitutional republic. And that's the only reason why our rights still exist. Because freedom doesn't come from the majority. It comes from limits on power. Well, everybody, if you got something out of this episode, please share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. And follow the show. And check us out at triggerhappytactical.com. And stay ready because we've got a whole lot more coming your way. And as always, don't forget, it's time to lock, load, and listen.